to Impact. I'm Richa Khandelwal Bhat.
And I'm Nick Barber.
And we are here with another special edition of Impact. This is the Christmas special, right, Nick?
Yes, it is. Happy holidays,
Happy
everyone.
holidays.
Jolly jingles!
Oh,
Yay!
yes. There's some of the Impact elves in the background. We all wish you a
yeah.
happy holiday season.
So, Merry Christmas, and this is the festival of joy, of light, of Santa Claus,
Yep.
and we must enjoy it to the full. So, we have a great show coming up for you. Before I go further, you must be wondering, where's Heidi Phillipson?
Where is Heidi
Is she
Phillipson?
hiding anywhere? Well, she's not hiding. She is at home. She's working very hard on her film, Her Telling Heart. She's finishing the project, also visiting family. She'll be back with you in the new year, so keep looking out for Heidi.
All right.
Nick, what do we have in the first segment here?
Our first segment is Philip Morris, our CEO at Proctors Theater, who will be interviewing Anne Marie. And Anne Marie is a professional violinist, and she is the director of the Musicians of Malwick. And the Musicians of Malwick reside at Philip Schuyler in Albany and at the Schenectady County Community College. So we should be hearing some wonderful holiday music from the Musicians of Malwick with Anne Marie.
Great, and I know one thing for a fact, that the musicians out here in upstate New York are really brilliant, and they do such a great job. I've heard some of them at the Mohu Festival. So let's look out for Philip Morris interviewing Anne Marie.
Let's watch.
Hi, I'm Philip Morris. I'm the interviewer for the art segment of Impact. Our guest today is Anne Marie Baker Schwartz, who is the organizer of, I think, founder of Musicians from Malwick, which is based at Schenectady County Community College and St. Rose.
Actually, Schuyler Mansion, New York State Historic Site.
Ah, okay. Well, tell us a minute of Musicians of Malwick.
We were founded in 1999.
You founded it?
I founded it. After the birth of my second child, I was looking for purpose. And about 6 weeks after he was born, I was sitting in the upstairs offices of the Schuyler Mansion thinking, I really want to get into the history of music in this area in upstate New York, looking through their archives and all their musical references, and thinking this is a nice fit, chamber music in a historic site. And that's how the group started. And 12 years later, we're still at the Schuyler Mansion, and we started at the University of Albany as well, and then got this wonderful residency at the community college here in Schenectady.
So your interest, is your interest historic as well as a musician? You're a violinist and a violist?
Yes. And yes, most definitely. I've always loved music history, and as I began to perform more chamber music in this area, I started wondering, what did people hear in upstate New York in these wealthy homes in the late 1700s and early 1800s? And the more I delved into it, the more I realized this was a wide open field with very little research that had been done. And so I started spending time at the New York State Library and the special collections, pouring through music that wasn't cataloged in boxes, and realizing there was this wonderful relationship between these historic patrician families and music and important visitors coming to the area, and that actually Albany was a very important site early on.
So are you trained as a musicologist, or have you sort of become a musicologist?
Both. I actually, when I started this, I wasn't trained. I had a very useful degree of music performance, and I'm being sarcastic.
It is very useful, but we'll go to that in a minute.
Okay. And then I went back, actually sitting that day in the Schuyler Mansion, I realized I need to formalize my experience with this, and I went back and got my degree in American history at the university. And they were very kind to me and allowed me to really focus on music rather than making it broader. So I had a chance to spend hours I should say thousands of hours researching at the New York State Library.
Well, let's go back to Musicians of Malwick for a minute and some of this, because I'm also amazed you are the premier organizer of pickup orchestras in the region. I mean,
yes.
I mean, you're it. When someone wants an orchestra, they're calling you.
They call me, yes.
How the hell did that happen?
I don't know. I fell into that mainly, I think, through Albany Pro Musica and David Janauer. I started contracting for him almost 30 years ago, and that expanded to Burn Hills Oratorio and just about any other choral group in the area. I am the person they call, and I put together their orchestra, whether it's a modest 5-piece ensemble or a much more ambitious 70-piece ensemble.
So what has that taught you about the region? I mean, when you think about 30 years, I didn't realize you don't look old enough for 30 years.
Thank you.
But when you 30 years of doing that, what have you learned about our place?
Well, actually, it's changed a lot since I first came here. In 1982, when I graduated from college, and I actually grew up in this area, and when I came back, the Albany Symphony, the Schenectady Symphony were the two sort of games in town. Everybody was pretty much local. And over, I'd say, the last 2 decades, it's expanded greatly, actually partially thanks to you and the growth of Proctors and the necessity for bringing in musicians and the expansion of work in the area, which it definitely has done. The symphony itself expanded its schedule. I'm talking about the Albany Symphony. They bring in many more musicians from throughout the Northeast, actually, and not just regionally, but really to Boston and New York City. And those musicians look for work. The symphony alone isn't enough to make a living, so they look for what we call freelance work, and that's how it's expanded. So I have really a very large pool of players to draw upon.
So, and that's changed. So it went from a local pool to now this
a much more regional
Boston,
pool. Yes.
New York pool. And how do you know these folks? Word of
From
mouth,
playing
or?
symphony myself. And so when I first came in, we were definitely looking at players who lived in the area and mainly taught, combining that with the symphonic work to make their livings. Now we have players who predominantly perform, and they piece together a life through playing Albany Symphony and maybe Glens Falls and maybe Glimmerglass Opera in the summertime, and then whatever freelance work that I can offer. So between the various jobs, you can piece together a life, and then you usually put it together with teaching private students.
Right. So that's very interesting. So you've had the impact of actually helping create employment.
Right. It's definitely a symbiotic relationship where one group expands, so then another group can expand too, because they're able to offer the musicians more work, and we sort of piggyback off of each other's schedules. Like if I know the symphony has a week's worth of performances and their players, there's actually a fairly substantial pool coming down from Canada too. And so if I know that the symphony has evening services, then I can talk to one of the choral societies. Maybe we can do something in the afternoon that day. And then we all sort of share.
So 30 years ago, how many traditional players might have come close to making a living between teaching and playing and everything else?
Maybe 5 or 10%. It's a very small pool.
And now it's a lot more.
A lot more, I'd say 40 or 50%. The whole sort of landscape has changed that way, and players are much more willing to travel. The symphony has made it possible by actually consolidating their schedule to maybe a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday schedule instead of being spread over 2 weeks. So those players can come up and have a very compact experience that way, supplemented by what we're able to offer with the choral work, and then that makes a nice week or week and a half's worth of work for them.
Well, it's really something. That's terrific.
Thank you.
Actually, and it's also a terrific realization for the region. I mean, in lots of ways, it's one of those things that someone ought to declare loudly.
Exactly. Well, and even Proctors, I'm trying to think of the last big thing you had, West Side Story. Was that in August? And so a cadre of players was able to have a really nice experience of work, very intense and enough to make a living from. And once again, it's all putting the pieces together and making it work.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So, back to Musicians Available.
Okay.
You've done some incredible projects. So the opera is the one I know most from a few years ago.
That's the one I'm most proud of.
And so speak to it for a moment.
Well, that came from my research. I had a fellowship at the New York State Library.
What title of it? Title of the opera?
The Poor Soldier by William Shield. It was a 1783 opera written by a British composer who was working in Drury Lane, London. And he wrote an opera about British soldiers who've gone to America and, of course, been defeated in battle and coming back, and this whole relationship between Irish infantry sort of and English upper-class soldiers or officers, and the whole idea of honor and patriotism and what it meant. But it was a very popular opera in America. Even as the last British soldiers were leaving New York City in November of 1783, we were getting ready to perform this British opera, which I find very ironic. And
well, we never really hated them.
No, we were just fighting for it.
We were just fighting them.
Right.
Well, part of that's just the whole separation, which the opera talks about, of the classes.
Exactly.
I mean, when you're really fighting the king, you weren't fighting the Brits. And
Exactly, and it was all about land and taxes anyway. But for us, it was they're sort of folk operas in a way. They use these popular Irish, Scottish, English tunes and sort of take them to the next level artistically with sophisticated accompaniments. And so that's what we were doing here in America. We couldn't get enough of The Poor Soldier. It was performed hundreds of times between its debut here in 1783 all the way until the 1850s. It was a constant staple in the repertory.
So how did it get lost between 1850 and
That kind
your
of-
performance 2 years ago?
Well, it just kind of went out of vogue. I mean, new operas like Offenbach, and of course we got into Italian opera, you know, by the late 1820s, 1830s, and so this grand opera became the way to go, and then Broadway became the way to go. And so these colonial operas were lost, but they were a very important part of the early American cultural experience and the whole idea of what they experienced and the acquisition of taste and culture, which was how music was used back then. And so I thought it was worth going back and looking at this, and I think people who experienced seeing the opera, and we tried our best to make it sort of an authentic experience, saw what a great piece it was, and that it was still relevant and funny, and that the music still works, and that the story still works.
So with the ability to look back, let me ask you about looking forward.
Okay.
Many people see serious classical music as in agony.
Yes.
Yet here you're talking about more musicians potentially eating off it than
Right.
10 years before, or at least eating off the craft of it. Maybe it's not playing serious music, but the
Right.
craft is there. What do you see the next 5 to 10 years for the music of your passion?
Well, you know, it's funny. I think things are cyclical. And I think that we've seen a real decline in interest in what we call serious art music. But I think that's taking a turnaround, and it may not be so obvious, but I think that many groups are looking for their niche all throughout the country. In fact, not just in America, but in Europe too. And as we find that niche, as we get, in a strange way, back to more live music through things like web broadcast and bringing music into people's homes in a different kind of way, while it may not be musicians actually showing up at your door and playing in your living room, we're getting there live still via other routes. And people are getting interested in their culture. I wouldn't have found an audience for The Poor Soldier if there hadn't been an interest in, I think, American culture. So I think we're going to see a little bit of a turnaround and a different use for music. Maybe the symphonic, huge orchestra situation is on hold for a while or in decline. But I think some of these smaller, more original experiences with music are actually coming back, and that people see not only an interest for it, but a need for it and a desire to connect with it in a way that you can't connect with a big symphony orchestra where it's removed on stage and sort of distant and formal.
Yeah, well, certainly we, for Proctors, we see the opportunity for culture, art, and the connection of people to be a priority. I mean, that's kind of where people are going to be.
And it's the authentic experience. And actually, you know, originally audiences, for example, in Mozart's time, responded to the players on stage. They weren't quiet. If they heard a new harmony, they would cheer and scream and stop their performance and have the orchestra play it again. And I think we're seeing more of that interaction, which is actually a positive thing, not a negative thing.
Anne-Marie, thank you very much. You're just
very welcome.
delightful.